Welcome back to the Empowering Minds Mental Health Podcast. Today, I have Dr. David Kent. He's a respected mental health educator and speaker who specializes in helping people understand how stress, trauma, and daily life can impact the brain. I'm very thankful that you made time to come on to the podcast today, Dr. Kent.
You're welcome. I really feel appreciative that you let me come on. I'll always take
Absolutely.
a platform to talk about things that are near and dear to my heart and try to make sure I can touch other people with the things that I know. I feel really blessed. And just to give a little background, I'm a board certified psychiatrist. Some people don't know exactly what that means. It means that I had to go through the medical school and then 4 years after that of psychiatry training. So it's a type of medical specialty. I
Mhm.
trained at the University of Iowa in the 1980s. At that time, I felt like it was one of the best, most premier psychiatric programs in the world. So I kind of got lucky. I just kind of fell into it. And so I've been since practicing in the Boise, Idaho area since 1990. So I've been going on 35 and a half years of practicing psychiatry in a private setting. I've originally did research at the University of Iowa and done a little bit of been involved with providing data for research since I've been here. So a little bit of researcher there, but mostly a private practitioner. I've worked in
Mhm.
every setting, hospital work, outpatient work. Our company even had a 1 year contract in the penitentiary here in Idaho. So I'd go out there part-time and see inmates at all levels, even death row inmates. So, and I used to work in state hospital when I was a resident. So there's nothing
Mhm.
I haven't come across or seen, no type of thing that hasn't really come across to my desk essentially. So I feel like I
Mhm.
have a lot to offer. And I really appreciate bringing, we'll go over my book as we go along, but I spent a few years just wondering if I could write a book because I really felt like I had something inside to share so
Mhm.
I could give people better education, accurate information about mental illness and what it is and how it can be treated. And I said, to you earlier, it's not my opinion, it's not a belief system, it's based on the current science that we have today.
Absolutely. All right. So thank you for just giving. I wanted you to just elaborate on the work that you do so that the viewers who will see this later can just kind of, have that connection. And so I'm real big on brain health. And the older I get, that's something that I kind of I study on. And so my first question for you, what does it actually mean when the brain feels like it's on tilt?
Well, that, is part of the name of my book, which is Why Me, the Brain on Tilt.
Mhm.
Part of that it harkens back to I used to play poker for about 20 years because I love the human interaction of poker because it's not about just numbers, it's about playing another player and
Mhm.
reading what they're doing, reading their what they call tells. And there's an expression in poker called being on tilt. And what that means is if you get the other player to be emotional or upset or angry, they start making mistakes. Then they make errors. And so that's how you can beat them. So being on tilt means you're off or you're emotional, you're not in control, you're off balance. That's what it means. So mental illness in a sense is like that. When the brain is not treated properly or we're not getting help, it gets on
Mhm.
tilt. So it gets off balance. And then people make poor judgments when they're off balance. When they have a mental episode, we know commonly they might spend too much money or they might do something that shows poor discretion or even break the
Mhm.
law. And that's because their brain is on, quote, tilt. And so that's kind of why I did that. That's sort of kind of my background a little bit, but it kind of was a nice expression as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I kind of want to ask you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So when the brain is on tilt, does that kind of lead a little bit into like emotional regulation?
It definitely affects it because our brain is a bag of a bunch of parts. There's a whole bunch
Mm-hmm.
of um, what I call division of labor in the brain. You
Mm-hmm.
have all kinds of areas that have to communicate with each other. You have the emotion centers, which is mainly housed in the limbic system in the brain, which is deep inside the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And all mammals have a limbic system. So that's why we have such a kinship to other mammals, as they have the same thing. So if you have a pet like a dog or even a cat, they're very in tune to your emotional state, and you're very in tune to their
Mm-hmm.
emotional state. And so That's one of the parts of the brain that's really critical, but the prefrontal lobe and the frontal lobes are also involved in reasoning and showing breaks, and they're highly connected to the limbic system.
Hmm.
So, for instance, TMS or transcranial magnetic stimulation targets specific areas on the surface of the brain, like the left prefrontal, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. In fact, you're from North Carolina. In South Carolina, there's a gentleman named Mark George. He's a psychiatrist neurologist who actually
Hmm.
discovered TMS. He's famous. He's down in Charlotte, and he's world famous for his discovery of brain circuits that we can actually target and treat. So emotion plays a critical role in mental health. No matter what you're talking about, it's depression, you have different ranges of emotion. You have sadness. You can get anxiety with it, and a lot of apprehension, a lot of other emotions that occur. In obsessive compulsive disorder, you have anxiety. Um, and then in bipolar disorder, you have a huge range of emotions. You can have euphoria or agitation and irritability. You can go
Hmm.
into deep depression. Um, Anxiety is a big red flag for bipolar because it's more extreme. And so emotion plays a critical role in almost all mental illnesses. And when they're out of control, that means that the disorder itself is out of control.
So you mentioned a couple of diagnoses, and in my years of work in mental health, some of my clients have always said, I feel stuck. So why do some people feel stuck in the why me mindset when they are overwhelmed?
But that would be probably when they're first dealing with it or in the early phases, right?
Hmm.
Almost any illness, we often ask ourselves, why me? Whether it's a mental illness or you've got cancer or you've got some pretty serious illness, the
Hmm.
first thing that happens is, well, why do I have to have this? Why me? So that's why I put the name of the book on there, is because it's a common thought that people have when they come down with something that they don't want to have. And
Hmm.
so I think I forgot what your question was now. What was your
Oh,
question?
why do some people feel stuck in the why me mindset when they're
The
overwhelmed?
feeling stuck part, yeah.
Hmm.
So until the brain gets rebalanced or stabilized, they're going to feel
Hmm.
stuck. And the reason is they can't think their way out of it.
Hmm.
They can't think because the brain is a powerful organ, right? Just like our
Hmm.
heart or our kidney. If our heart is ailing and we have some kind of arrhythmia or some kind of heart defect, we can
Hmm.
think as hard as we want to think, but that's not going to go away. And so we have to get away from the notion that we can somehow control the brain with all of our thoughts at all times, but we
Hmm.
can't do that with any other organ. Now, there's certainly powerful therapies that can help our brain for sure.
Hmm.
Absolutely. However, these serious mental illnesses cannot be just triggered or controlled by thinking alone. So if someone's in a mental health episode, whether it's depression or mania or something else, the brain is now in charge. And so they feel stuck because they can't do anything about it.
Hmm.
But what they can do about it is recognize that something's wrong and hopefully get into a qualified mental health professional who can begin to identify or diagnose exactly what's going on and get
Hmm.
them, quote, unstuck, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I'm so glad you mentioned that about reaching out for support. For example, like you said, getting in contact with a qualified mental health professional, because there's so many stigmas around mental health. In my experience, I've known people who they will say, I need help, but they are embarrassed to go receive help because they don't want people to look at them like they have an issue. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because that is a big part of the podcast that I push out. Please tap into resources to get some help. Yeah.
I
So,
appreciate that.
um,
And that I don't know if you want to comment on the stigma part of it or not, but we'll get to that at some point.
sure. Okay. So you mentioned a couple of things, and again, I said I'm really big on brain health. And so chronic stress and trauma. How do they affect the brain's ability to think clearly?
Where they clearly are not helpful at all.
No.
And it depends on the trauma, the amount of trauma, the degree of the trauma, and the degree of the stress.
Hmm.
Stress is kind of what I call a two-edged sword. Stress alone can cause problems, not only for the brain, but the rest of the body. It's just
Oh
not
yeah.
good on us because it increases the cortisol levels, which has ramifications for the whole body.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes stress is a symptom. And what I mean by that is when someone feels extra amount of stress, it could be that they're in a mental health episode like depression or something like that, because it heightens the sense of stress. When
Mm-hmm.
people are depressed, they tend to look backwards. They said, well, they think and they ruminate about bad things that happened in the past. When the depression gets stabilized, their sense of feeling stress goes down, and they start to look at the here and now and into the future. They become what they call future oriented. And so stress could mean several things. Stress is never good, but it could just mean, that they have an episode going on, and that's a symptom of that episode. But we also have other stressors that may not necessarily be that. If you're in war or you're being abused or an abusive situation or you're in a
Mm-hmm.
toxic environment at work or at home,
Mm-hmm.
none of that is helpful. None of that is helpful. So it doesn't necessarily create mental illness, except for maybe PTSD, which is a mental illness. PTSD is
Yes.
caused directly by trauma. And so that's a tough one because the brain doesn't forget easily. It's like an elephant. It just doesn't forget because where does it go? It goes into the limbic system where there's the hippocampus. That's a memory center. That's part of the limbic system. The limbic system, the rest of it's all about emotion. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're fusing memory with emotion together in the limbic system. But it can be overcome with the right therapy and the right approach. So, but it does definitely affect things. If I have a patient who say has depression, but they also have PTSD, I have to keep that in consideration.
Yes.
You can't just treat the depression and turn your back. They have something else that's in the background that, unless it's addressed, it just doesn't seem to want to go away
Mm-hmm.
because of the brain's power to remember. And sometimes they don't always have it in the forefront in their memory. It gets
Mm-hmm.
buried down, but there's what we call triggers, right? Things that
Yeah.
happen that remind them of an event, and then they have this surge of emotions and anxiety, and even flashbacks of the events. So, PTSD is very real. It's brain based,
Mm-hmm.
and we have these powerful brains, which is good on the one hand, but it can hurt us on the other hand sometimes if we don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you just for your transparency. And so, can't remember how many years ago it was now. I'm gonna say maybe 8 years ago or so. You mentioned about how chronic stress can impact both mental and physical, and that is a lived experience. Um, I was diagnosed with MS, and I was like, there's no way I don't have MS. And so I went back for,
So that
well, I
was a
say
why
went
me
back.
moment, right? A why me moment.
Yeah, it was a why me moment, and I kept saying, there's no way. This is not it. And stress was so heavy. I was a size 8. When I went back to the doctor, I was a size 3, 4. It impacted me mentally and physically. And so I went back. I said, I got to have another follow up. There's no way I have MS. So I was misdiagnosed. I have a neuromuscular disorder that kind of mimic some of the same symptoms. But when I do presentations, I show people my before picture and my after picture because I want them to see just how chronic stress can really impact you.
Yeah, no question about it. Especially it's the fear of the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So with a misdiagnosis, you don't really have all the pieces of the puzzle. So all you can
Mm-hmm.
do is have this reverberation in your brain about what does that mean and how's this going to
Yeah.
affect me and how am I going to be able to work and all these things just
Yep.
reverberate around and around in your brain and it causes stress.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer in being careful how you make diagnoses. Make the right one because it
Mm-hmm.
really matters that you get it right. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you don't get it right, you can send people for years down the wrong path.
Yes,
And so I'm a big believer in being careful about getting it right.
absolutely. So I want to talk to you too, continuing on about brain health. So what are some signs that people should look for when their brain is becoming overloaded?
Well, there's a lot of little sensitive things that happen when the brain is off.
Mm-hmm.
sleep being one of them. So if people are struggling with sleep, it's a sensitive indicator that something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes appetite, energy
Mm-hmm.
level,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, if there's more irritability. Those are
Yeah.
little things that people will have. Sometimes people even get short of breath, sometimes have panic attacks, or they get chest pain or
Yeah.
abdominal GI complaints. There was
Mm-hmm.
a study done a long time ago that showed that 50% of people that went to a family doctor with GI or physical complaints, 50% actually had a mental illness to explain it. And if you treated the mental
Mm-hmm.
illness properly, those physical symptoms would go away.
Mm-hmm.
So the link between the brain and the rest of the body is more like a deep connection rather than a distant communication like they're sending emails. It's more like the fingers. I always said go like this. This is what the brain body connection looks like. Or it's all intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
They're not one. They're not different. They're just the same. But because the brain is such a powerful organ, it's connected to every process in the body,
Mm-hmm.
every single process. And so if the brain is off balance or on tilt or not in the right place, then the body feels that way. And that's why people will go to the doctor and say, gosh, I've been having all these stomach pains, or I've had all these headaches, or I've been having all these things.
Mm-hmm.
If the doctor's doing their job, they'll cover all their bases and they'll say, well, what about this? What about that? What about that? And they'll start to narrow it down and say, oh, you have depression or you have this. And then if
Mm-hmm.
they treat that, then the other stuff tends to go away. And so it's okay to run other tests and labs. It's okay to cover all your bases, but you always have to keep an eye out for these mental illnesses because they're what we call ubiquitous. Ubiquitous means they're everywhere. They're 50% of all medical practices will have some sort of psychiatric component in it, and it will affect the treatment and the approach that the doctor should be taking.
So, speaking of being the brain being overloaded, do you have any everyday strategies that will help bring the brain back into balance? Just very simple things that people can maybe use it at home to kind of help them.
Well, there's some things, if you don't have anything serious going on,
Mm-hmm.
like a really severe depression or you're bipolar and uncontrolled or you're schizophrenic or whatever, everyone should do these things anyways, but the basic things are sleep hygiene, right? Going to bed at the same
Yes.
time, not overstimulating yourself too much before bed, keeping a routine, not drinking caffeine before bed, and things like that, or too much alcohol before bed. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's physical things like regular, moderate exercise, not too much, not too little, managing your weight, managing your
Mm-hmm.
diet, and eating healthier foods, avoiding the fast foods and all the processed foods that are out there. It's pretty clear in our Western society that our food diet is not good, but there's
Yeah.
plenty of information on what is good. And if you are careful about the amount of food you eat and the types of food you eat, you'll be physically healthier. And that helps manage stress. And there's
Mm-hmm.
lots of psychological things like meditation and mindfulness, um, and exercise like yoga and Pilates and different things. Everything should be done in moderation because it's
Yes.
easy to get too excessive. But if you do those things and you become in tune to your own body and your own mind, those things are all helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And even with mental illness, they're helpful unless they're in a really severe episode. Then they feel bad because they can't really accomplish those things, so they beat themselves up. Say I tell
Mm-hmm.
somebody with severe depression, well, just go out and run more, and they can't do it, then they're going to feel even worse. And
Mm-hmm.
they feel guilty they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So you got to take baby steps when you're going through a mental health episode and work your way up to stuff once you're stabilized.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned a couple of things, and I want to ask you about caregivers who are supporting their loved one. What are some things that they can do as well? Because I, I found out that a lot of times caregivers for their mom or whoever it is, they become very exhausted and overwhelmed. It can be a lot.
Well, that's caregiver burnout, and that's extremely
Hmm.
common. It's pretty easy to understand. You're dealing with something, and it gets wearing and taxing over time. I had to do
Hmm.
that with our son who had a stroke a few years ago, and we were full-time caregivers. while I worked and tried to, keep my career moving forward and through COVID. So we went through a really challenging
Mm.
period in our life, and we stopped getting professional caregiver help because he was on Medicaid and they wouldn't cover it. So we got really, really, really worn out.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that. Somehow you have to have a greater village, right? You have to have people around you, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
friends or family, that can give you breaks and give you moral support.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand what you're dealing with. If it's a mental illness you're dealing with, then you need to have proper information so that you don't place unnecessary judgment on the individual. Like if the individual, if you have the thought that they can somehow get over this, and you just keep telling them to get over it, both the patient and you are going to have a bad result.
Oh yeah.
If you can say it's a brain-based disorder, it's basically like a medical condition, it's not your fault, and they feel like you don't never want to shame somebody. You never want to make them feel guilty or place a judgment on them or tell them
Oh.
to do things that are really unrealistic. And if you have a realistic view of what you can and can't do, that helps.
Mm.
If you're thinking that you can cure them and you can get them back to some complete level of normalcy, that might be unrealistic. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
always examine your own expectations of what you're doing and what you expect to have as an outcome. So that helps. Plus, just taking care of yourself, right? Make sure you're
Mm-hmm.
eating, sleeping, and doing everything you're supposed to. Don't do it at the peril of your own health. Whatever you're doing,
Right.
don't do it at the peril of your own health. And that's healthy for the person you're caring for with because you're in better shape to take care of them than if you melt down and you can't do it anymore. Then no one's benefiting from
Mm-hmm.
that. So ask for help sometimes, get other people to jump in. There's a greater village out there, most likely. We found people that were like angels in our life
Yeah.
that
As you
stepped in
said,
and took over for us, for at times and allowed us to take a break. And I just can't believe how much people stepped forward for us.
I'm
People
glad
that
that they
didn't,
did.
we were super impressed with some people.
Good. And I'm glad you had that support. And I'm just listening to some of the things you're saying. So some of my clients, well, most of them have a dual diagnosis and they deal with substance abuse too. And, some of the family or the caregiver would say, for example, I just wish John would just stop. And I had to explain to them, but this substance abuse, it's not like a light switch, like they can turn it on and off. So when we would have our meetings, I would always provide education um, around the diagnosis and connecting them to other resources in the community that would kind of help the family unit understand that John just can't turn this on and off because if he could, then
He
he
would.
would.
He would. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, people don't understand substance addiction as an illness,
Mm-hmm.
and
Sure
some
is.
people have some kind of gene that makes it very, very difficult for them to turn it
Mm-hmm.
off. Like one person could drink some alcohol and walk away, no problem. The
Yep.
next person with the wrong gene can take one little whiff, a snip, and just a little tiny sip or a drop hits their cheeks and lips, and they're done. They can't they
Yep.
can't turn it off. So there is something unique about that. Does it mean they can't become sober? No, it doesn't mean that. But what it means is it's much more challenging for them to do
Mm-hmm.
that. It kind of takes a village, right?
It
Where
does.
their loved ones and family, in a loving but firm and boundary setting way, say, we love you too much to see you drinking or using these drugs. And
Mm-hmm.
we as a family or we as your group of friends want you to stop. We care about you that much.
Mm-hmm.
And those sorts of interventions can be very powerful. And it can get people to stop even for a little while to see what sobriety
Yep.
is like. So, but placing judgment and placing sort of a personalized rule of how this should work, we all personalize
Mm-hmm.
our own experience to somebody else. But it doesn't really work that way because
Mm-hmm.
we don't have the same genes, we don't have the same brain, we don't have the same illnesses as somebody else. So it's not really
Mm-hmm.
fair.
Right.
What's better to say is I I sympathize or I empathize with you. I know it's really tough. I know this is really hard, but because I care about you, because I love you, I really want to see if you can get sober because it's not good for you. And
Mm-hmm.
whatever I can do to kind of help you with that and set boundaries and make sure people in their life who aren't sober, who are bad influences, maybe they don't come into their life. My son,
Mm-hmm.
before he had his stroke, he had issues with that. And people after a stroke would try to bring him stuff. And you know what? They didn't get through the door.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get through the door. You know why? Because we put our foot down.
Right.
So we were able to protect him. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's necessary as you set firm, hard boundaries to
Yeah.
protect somebody from that. Because
Mm-hmm.
all research shows the same thing. If you have trouble with alcoholism or drug abuse and you go back to that environment, it's almost impossible to remain sober.
Yep.
Impossible. So if you have friends that can't give it up, you don't have those friends.
Yep.
Or family even, even family, you can't be around them.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be around people that are sober and supportive.
Absolutely. Yeah. That kind of leads to a life of recovery. And recovery is something that a person, I mean, it's lifetime. A lot of times there's a misconception when people say, "Oh, well, John is in recovery." They think that John is miraculously healed and he'll never have this issue again. But again, it's lifelong. And so that's what I kind of try
Yes,
to educate
because it's
people.
coming from the brain. And the brain
Right.
is still there. It still
Yep.
wants to say it's okay to do this. So
Mm-hmm.
it takes mental fortitude and power and a village of support to
Yes.
keep sober. That's why things like AA exist, is you go into a group of
Mm-hmm.
people that are hopefully saying, I can call your BS on this. We've all been there. They can see through the
Mm-hmm.
BS. And so they're kind of a powerful group because you can say what you want, but no, that's not really right.
Mm-hmm.
Same with loving, caring family that can set the proper boundaries. But you don't get cured, at least not so far, until we can come up with some kind of gene switch where we can get rid of that gene that's causing it. It's not a cure. It's
Right.
recovery.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to tie that into misconception. So what are some common misconceptions about how the brain reacts to pressure?
Let me maybe couch it this way a little bit
Okay.
differently. So there's myths about mental illness, right? There's myths that we have these ideas. And
Mm-hmm.
one myth is that mental illness is a weakness.
Yep.
That's pretty pervasive. The
Mm-hmm.
reality is it's a medical condition. It's a brain condition.
That's right.
Nothing different than diabetes or kidney disease or anything. It's no different. So we have
Mm-hmm.
to dispel the myths. The second one is that people with mental illness are dangerous. The reality
Mm-hmm.
is that they're more likely to be victims than they are to be perpetrators. In fact, the number of perpetrators that have mental illness is like 3% or 2%. It's really, really small. But we hear it in the news is what perpetuates that kind of myth. Is the very first thing that when there's a newscast on, say, a shooting or whatever, they must be crazy. Almost
Yep.
instantly, they must be deranged or crazy. But 9 times out of 10, or even more than that, or even more, they're not. They might have been marginalized when they're growing up. They might have been bullied when they're growing up, but they have
Mm-hmm.
no diagnosed mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a misconception. And the other thing is that mental illness is somehow rare. But in reality, 1 in 5 Americans will be affected by mental illness. But
Mm-hmm.
if 50% of people sometime in their lifetime will have a mental health episode, that's 1 out of 2. And so it affects almost all of us in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to understand that. The other misconception is it's permanent or untreatable. But reality is um, that's not the case. Recovery is possible almost every time. Now, maybe it won't be back to complete normalcy, but to a place of stability and where
Yep.
they can look forward to the future. And then there's always, I grew up in the 80s, so the modality back then was psychoanalytic psychotherapy or Freudian-based treatment, which basically blamed it all on bad parenting or bad family of origin. But we've since
Mm-hmm.
found that that's really not the case. Now, you can have bad families and bad families of origin. There's no question that can cause
Mm-hmm.
trauma and PTSD, but that doesn't necessarily produce schizophrenia or bipolar or schizoaffective disorder. Um, the more important factors are genetics and environment. Those are the
Mm-hmm.
two things that are really involved in mental illness. And then all the understanding this removes the blame from families, that we don't have to self-blame for all this. So those are just some ideas about people's misconception about mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answered your question the way you wanted to hear
Yes.
it.
Yes, it
Okay.
did. It did. So I thank you so much for the education that you have provided. I know the viewers will, you know, some will probably will resonate with them, but I thank you for just being transparent and just laying it out on the line. And so now, my last question, what encouragement would you give to someone who feels mentally drained and they're trying to get back to themselves?
Well, I would tell them to take a deep breath and
Mm-hmm.
think about the next step. The next step is to reach out for help.
Yes.
Because if you don't, you're just going to continue to suffer in silence.
Yep.
And so you need to reach out, and that depends on what you're struggling with. If it's depression or some kind of mental health episode, then trying to find a qualified, well trained, reputable mental health professional in your area and start there and see
Mm-hmm.
if you can get a proper diagnosis, a proper treatment, and make sure it's evidence based treatment. And it's not some belief system treatment or some kind of notion, but it's evidence based. Evidence based treatment has been around a long time. The 80s was a revolution of evidence based treatment because I was in the 80s. I
Mm-hmm.
trained at a center that had some of the best researchers in the world, and that was hammered home for me. So, if you get a good evidence based psychiatrist or therapist, you're going to get the best treatment. You're going to get the most accurate diagnosis, hopefully. So, but seek out, reach out. You know, you might start with family, you might start with a friend, but to reach out for help and get to the right people. That's the take home message. And the other thing in my book I talk about is early intervention can make a
Mm-hmm.
world of difference versus, and but I also mentioned in the book that the average person waits 6 to 8 years from their first mental health episode till they actually get treatment. So they're a little bit harder to treat, their outcomes aren't as good. So if we can identify at its earliest stages, we have so much better outcomes, so
Mm-hmm.
much better. So that's another take home.
Right. Well, you've mentioned your book a couple of times, and so I would really love for you to share again the name of your book, how people can purchase your book, if you want to share any
I think
information
this
with your
shows up
website.
backwards. Is the words backwards on this?
No,
No,
I
okay.
love that cover.
So this
I
is my
love that.
plug. It's really shameless.
Hmm.
So here's the book. Oh, here's another one. So it's called Why Me? The Brain on Tilt. And I'm Dr.
Hmm.
David Kent. There's several ways you can get it. It's on Amazon, but I have an author website which is www.davidkentauthor.com. So if you go to that, you get to see some of my background, my bio. I have a little blog on there. You can email me if you wanted to. I have a little newsletter sign up list. And then you can also, there's a buy now button on there that takes you straight there. I have three formats. I have the paperback, which I just showed. There's a Kindle version, and now there's an audio version, which has turned out really awesome. I had a professional narrator out of Belfast who has an incredible voice, and I was really lucky to get him. So any version is great. It's not that expensive. And I'm really proud of it. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. It's kind of my legacy of all the work I put into this.
Hmm.
So I really recommend the book because I think it could be transformative. Every patient I've ever given it to or seen, they've given the universal feedback that it really was impactful and helped them understand themselves better and what to do about it. And those things just aren't readily available out there. I've not seen any psychiatrist write a book like this since the 1990s when Nancy Andreessen wrote The Broken Brain, but nothing since then. So it's kind of a shame that it's not out there.
Well, I'm excited. I can't wait to read. I love to read, so I can't wait to read your book and maybe possibly apply some of your strategies to my own life. So
I think you might find some gems in there.
yeah. Okay. Well, I just want to thank you again. You've really helped me today. The thing behind the podcast, which I shared with you earlier, is to empower, inspire, and encourage others. And so you've helped me do that today. So again, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
All right, you take care, and I'll
Thank
be
you.
in contact with you soon.
Okay.
All right, you take care.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye bye.